So I'm delighted to have you join me, James, and you're joining me from Bali. How cool is that?
Well, it is cool and warm at the same time, but today it's raining. But it's nice to be here. Thank you.
I'm a bit jealous, I have to say. So let's dive straight in. So for your book Legacy, we know that you've gone inside the All Blacks and you've studied them, and we'll talk about that later. But tell me about you and your sporting history. Where did your interest begin?
I mean, I'm a New Zealander, so we're all obsessed by sport, I guess. And one of the greatest thing you can hear as a New Zealander is, one day, son, you'll be an All Black. And I didn't quite make that, but I did manage to talk my way into the team at one point. My sport was actually skiing. I was also obsessed with Liverpool Football Club and the Cop and You'll Never Walk Alone. And I think one of the privileges that I've had in my life is that in the work that I do, because I get to work with some fantastic teams. I've worked with the All Blacks, or studied the All Blacks. I've presented to and worked a little bit with Liverpool Football Club, and also skied with the great Franz Klammer. So all the three posters I had on my wall, I've managed to kind of come full circle. So that's the privilege that I have in my work.
Okay, I'm going to use that system. I'm going to put posters on my wall of the people that I want to meet and the things I want to do. But going back to your book, you've had extraordinary success with that globally. What do you think has grabbed people's attention and their imagination, do you think?
It's a great question. I think, obviously the All Blacks are of interest to people, but there are plenty of All Black books. So, I've always asked myself kind of why. I think because it asks some pretty primal questions of leaders and of teams around why does it matter, around meaning, around values, around character, around ethos, all the kind of the guts of it, if you like, and the deep questions around what motivates people, or how do people motivate themselves. How do you create a great environment for success, not just in sport, not just in business, not just in a team, but in life, in a sense. And I think it seems to have sort of touched a universal chord. I think the other thing is that culture is so important. We're living in the Me Too times. Massively important, obviously, an understanding of what culture really is, behavior, and of how we behave towards each other as human beings, within teams, within organizations, and all the benefits that come out of great cultures, and all the clear dysfunctions that come out of poor cultures. So I think it's that, and I think underpinned also that it asks, the big question, why? Why does it matter? And purpose, particularly perhaps in the age of sort of the millennial. A lot gets talked about with millennials. People want work that matters, and they want their work to matter. And I think those questions are really important for leaders, and they're clearly really important for people. And I think they seem to have touched a chord.
You touched on purpose, so I'm going to jump onto that question actually for you. You say that higher purpose leads to higher performance. Are you finding that leaders are really grabbing that much more now? And is it having a positive effect on what's going on in their business by having it, really thinking about what their purpose is, and not to make a profit, but to have something beyond that?
I think so. I think, because there's a story I could tell actually about it, around why purpose is so important. The US Navy SEALs, I've had the opportunity to work a little bit with them, and they have Hell Week, what they call Hell Week, which is a tremendously challenging, maybe one of the most challenging induction processes for selecting potential combat warriors, if you like, and so Hell Week is very difficult. About only maybe less than 30%, maybe 20% get through. They start with 200, they get down to 30. So the question is why? Who gets through? Day one, they say, I'm sort of paraphrasing, but day one they say it's the kind of the Friday night SEALs that drop out, the people who just want to look good and be a SEAL on Friday night. Day two, it's the daddy's boys. They're doing it because their father wanted them to be a SEAL. Day three, it's the local heroes. It's the community expects. But it's really only when you get to the guys who have decided for themselves their deeper purpose, that they're proving something to themselves and why it matters, that are the ones that get through. And even more so, the guys who really thrive are the guys who are making it their purpose to motivate the rest of the team to make a contribution. And that sort of sense of the connection between contribution and purpose and personal performance and team performance, I think is slightly hardwired into us. If we're thinking about other people, we're not so much thinking about what we can get. It's a more humble way of performing and of serving, and that's tremendously powerful. People run into burning buildings for a higher purpose, their children. We do things for things that really, really matter. If our motivation is thin, our performance will only be, narrow. If we have something big to perform for, we'll perform hard and fast and effectively to get stuff done. And so I think on a very primal level, that's why it's important. And on an organizational level, people want to be part of something that matters. People want to be connected to, they want to go to dinner parties and say they're doing great work. They don't want to go to dinner parties and say they worked for Enron, for instance, and so it attracts and retains great people, particularly in a sort of millennial landscape. And I've used that a couple of times. I think it's possible to over-egg the millennial thing, but people have choice and they want to do work that matters. And I think purpose is a large part of creating a sense of connection with something that matters. And it also clarifies and provides alignment within an organization. And that's clearly something that most leaders are desperate to achieve.
Brilliant. Very eloquently put. I like that. Thank you. So
thank you.
You've worked with you've name dropped some great organizations that you've worked with, and you've worked with quite a few people. So clearly the purpose is one of the common denominators you must have seen with these high performing businesses and sports teams and organizations. What other common denominator have you seen? What things have you seen across all of these things, these people and these teams that give them that ability to perform?
I think there are a lot of things that don't transfer, between, say, sport and business and so on and so forth. Scales and scope and reward and alignment are all can be very different. But I think there are some core transferable principles between, special forces on one level, between, elite sports teams on another level, between elite business teams, or not so much elite business teams. And that becomes around the principles of their character, of their ethos. And I think my favorite, articulation of that ethos is the British SAS, who dares wins, as a sense of boldness. And then they really have four, key drivers, a relentless pursuit of excellence, personal discipline in all things, a sense of accountability and ownership. It's on me. What they call rank but no class, a sense that, sure, there's rank, but no one is better than anyone else. There is no kind of ingrained hierarchy that's gonna suppress creativity or imagination or innovation. May the best idea win. And what they call humility and a sense of humor. Stay humble and stay hungry. And be a decent human being, have fun, connect with human beings. And if you can create that environment around any team, I think they put it particularly well, but that's their language. The All Blacks or many other teams have expressed the same fundamental principles in their own, what I call uncommon common language, if you like. And I think there's a lot that we can learn from it. I think the other area is that idea of legacy, is playing for something bigger than yourself, seeing yourself as part of a continuum, what the All Blacks call leaving the jersey in a better place, making your contribution, or I've heard it said, and I think Amazon use it, leave your seat in a better place. Make a good job of what you're doing now and leave it in a better state for the next person. Make a contribution rather than take. And if you can create a culture where people are doing that, you can kick down doors and achieve pretty much anything.
Actually, seriously, now on that note of culture, that must be a huge competitive advantage if you've got that great culture, because as you said, culture is behavior. How can leaders create that strong culture?
Great. I think just on your first point, that culture is a competitive advantage. I think it's Napoleon said something great. He said the moral to the physical is as 3-to-1. The moral, the human factor to the physical assets is as 3-to-1. It's what in the military they call a force multiplier. It brings everything else to life. A sales team or any team can only, you can only make so many phone calls in a day. There's only so far you can improve in terms of the actions that you take. It's really the way that a team can coordinate, collaborate, connect, communicate, and make each other better, that you can kind of create that extra 5% that makes an extraordinary difference. In terms of how you do it, I think one of the best stories or best analogies I've heard about it is, you've inherited a great old country house, and it's beautiful, but it's seen better days. And you've got a big lawn, tennis court maybe, and it's a week of fine days. So what you do is you take everything out and you lay it on the lawn. And then you only take the stuff that you really like, the stuff that really works. And you say, okay, we'll do that. That's a keeper, that's a keeper, that's a keeper. And you put it back in the house. And then you walk around and you paint it in the meantime. And you walk around the house and you go, well, what's missing here? What do we need? What's required here? And that might be reward and recognition aligned with the kind of behaviors that you're after. A lot of the time, organizations have bonuses for performance, but not for character. For instance, you might not have a clarity of purpose or a well articulated narrative or story. You may not be very vague about who you enforce, when you enforce the rules, the behaviors, and when you endorse them. What are your measures? What are your monitors? All of those, and really, it's about creating the process. However, is really about creating inclusion. I always say that change starts at the top, but it really happens down below. And Wayne Smith, a former All Blacks coach, put it very well. He said, "People rise to a challenge if it is their challenge." People rise to a challenge if it is their challenge. So leaders who can create a context and a dialogue, a really genuine dialogue about, well, what can we expect from each other? What needs to happen here? What does heaven look like? What would be a great day at work? What would be a great place to work? And creates an ongoing process of connection and collaboration and conversation around what that might be. As I always sort of say, there's the output and the outcome. The output might be a kind of written culture document. The outcome should be galvanizing your team or your organization through the very process of designing your culture. And so it's an organic, ongoing conversation or series of conversations about what's missing, what's great, and what's missing, and what standards and expectations we can hold each other accountable for within any organization, and what's our purpose, and what's our story, and how do we express it. And if you get all of those factors in, I kind of always say, it's vision, values, and purpose. If you get those three legs on the stool, you've got something to sit on.
I like that. That's very good. And I love the example of a house and putting everything out on the lawn. I wish we'd done that when we moved house, but that's another topic. So going back to the comment you made that you said, it really needs to start at the top. So what if you are a leader and you're sort of like in the middle and you have your team? How can you change big picture culture when you probably only have influence in your own? How do you optimize your own team with a culture that might be difficult for you to influence? That's a difficult question.
No, I think it's a very good question. I think it's a question that many of us find in one way or the other. We're kind of enveloped in a bigger ocean, if you like, and we can see let's say the dysfunction in our own zone, or the lack of optimum performance in our own zone. I think one way to look at it, and this is different for different organizations, obviously, and there's no kind of silver bullet that answers this question, but we all operate as part of what Stanley McChrystal called, a team of teams. We're all in a team of teams. And really the way that anthropologically we organize ourselves tends to be that we're in teams of roughly 10 to 30 people, a platoon size, a rugby team size, a small department size within an organization, within a larger organization. And realistically, the line manager or the leader of those teams really can only genuinely influence that immediate environment. So the question that I always ask is, how can you create a great team that fulfills the higher purpose of an organization? And, most large organizations have a sense of, at least, it's written on the wall. It may not be lived, but at least it's an attempt to establish who they are and what they're about, what their identity is, what their ethos is. How can you start to create that conversation within your team about how you might deliver about it? What does that mean to you on the ground in your function and your region, in your kind of area of specialization, and how can you bring that to life and go actually prove to everyone else in that organization that your team really knows how to walk the walk. And that can be tremendously powerful within a small unit, because it's really the small unit, on the small unit level, that things really happen. After 30 people, 40 people, it starts to dissipate, effort starts to dissipate. But 15 to 30, there's kind of an anthropological reason that sports teams are roughly that kind of size, for instance, and that a creative department in an advertising agency is roughly that kind of size, and a sales team tends to be divided into roughly that kind of size. So, start in your own backyard, I guess, is the advice, and pilot it and prove that this way of doing things is really good. And as Bill Walsh says from the San Francisco 49ers, the score will take care of itself. You'll start to get results and they'll speak for themselves.
I love the fact you keep going back to the house, and we're back in the backyard. I'm in the UK. It rains a lot in the backyard. But anyway, so, going back to leaders, I suppose, in a different angle here. So you believe that leaders create leaders, but how easy is it to identify who is going to be a good leader? How do you as a leader see that person has that potential? What are the things they should be looking for, do you think?
Yeah. I think one great definition of leadership is that leaders take responsibility for the result, whatever that result is. If that result is bad, they take it on the chin and they say, my fault. If a task comes, they go, I got this. Ironically, if it all goes really well, they give it away. They're confident enough to say, yeah, great work, team. Look, I couldn't have done it without you. So really looking at that aspect, around personal responsibility and ownership and accountability, I think is really important. I work with teams, and one of the questions I ask when I go in is, hey, what's the leadership like around here? And people either point up or they point to themselves. Now, if they're pointing up, you don't quite have a leadership culture. You have a blame culture. It's somebody else's problem. It's happening upstairs. There's nothing I can do about it. I'm disempowered. It's nothing to do with me. If they're pointing to themselves and they're talking about, well, we have a few issues around this, or what I find difficult is this, they're seeing themselves as leaders. And the great cultures is, what in sport gets called a CEO in every position. You want people to be looking for that competitive advantage and looking for what it is and taking ownership and taking responsibility right down to the bottom level. In the military, it's called the Strategic Corporal. The war isn't won, or the battle isn't won or lost at the general staff. It's won or lost by the decisions that are made by the corporals in the field. And they're the real leaders in many ways. The decisions that get made in, front of house in a hotel, out on a sales team, on site in a construction business. Those decisions are massive decisions because they involve a lot of risk often, or liability, or they are also the opportunities to convert clients, to have those conversations. And empowerment is such a devalued word in a way, but by handing responsibility down the line, what I call pass the ball, to take that sports analogy, you can create leaders down the line. Leaders create leaders. Leaders create people who are prepared to take responsibility and have the space to take responsibility. And if you can create that, you have a really engaged, first you've got ownership, you have a very engaged team. But you also can convert those opportunities that back in the general staff, back in headquarters, back in the head office, you don't even see. So a culture that creates leaders, that empowers people, I think is fundamentally important. It creates agility and the opportunity to convert, and it creates ownership and accountability and all of that good stuff that we really want in our teams and our businesses.
Okay, that was a masterclass in an answer. That was fantastic. So going on from that, you've observed that exceptional results need exceptional circumstances. So how can a leader create exceptional circumstances? Is it about setting very high goals, or is it about creating great trust? What is it about?
Well, that quote comes originally from Wayne Smith again, actually from the All Blacks, that really, and there's an equation that wraps around it, that the performance you get at the end of the day, however you measure that, is equivalent to your your capability, your talent, either as a team or an individual. And that talent is either made the most of, multiplied, or not by the way you behave. So really, the exceptional circumstances is creating the environment for the right behaviors to make the most of your talent to deliver the results. So that's going to vary in every organization. I think the common things, the transferable principles are around, standards and expectations. What do we hold each other accountable for? I've always really loved the West Point honor code to, I will not lie, cheat, or steal, nor tolerate those who do. How do we keep an eye on each other? That peer group enforcement is much more powerful, and not in a judgmental way, but in a, come on guys, we can do this. We said we'd nail this. I know you're having a tough day, but let's do it. Coming from the person in the seat beside you is incredibly powerful. So creating that kind of devolved leadership, the leaders create leaders, the distributed leadership, having a very strong ethos, clarity, and knowing who we are and what we stand for is really, really important. And that sense of common cause, rather than just, it's another day at work, I'm clocking in. It's like, actually, I always really liked the Ford Motor Car Company. Their aim was to put a Ford in every driveway. Under Henry Ford, a Ford in every driveway. Now that's pretty clear what they're about. In Disney, at one point, it was to put a smile on the faces of families. Now, it doesn't matter if you're in an animation studio or in an adventure park, you know what your job is. And that clarity, that common cause is really important. Psychological safety, a place that people can make mistakes, because human beings do, and learn from those mistakes, not feel they have to cover those mistakes up. And that they can express themselves, and that's where innovation and creativity comes from. An environment of marginal gains, not trying to do one thing 100% better, but doing 100 things 1% better, not just trying to crack it big time every time, but really what are those small gains that you can make and get better every day. Belief in belonging, which really is that ethos side of things, and ability to handle pressure, and to understand what pressure is, and to really work with that. And I think that's something that's new, that's really coming into business from sport. It's relatively new in sport, but the ability to go, right, well, let's condition ourselves to be able to handle those pressure moments. Leadership often only really happens once or twice a day, but they're pressure moments. How do you handle that? What does the brain biology do? An understanding of that. And then sort of finally, I think around authenticity and connection. Genuine human beings. There was a sort of a drift in business really around you put your corporate suit on, your corporate suit of armor, and you go there and you be somebody else. And I don't think that washes it so well anymore. It's certainly not what people are looking for. It doesn't make people happy. It leads to burnout. It leads to white collar crime or poor behaviors. It leads to all of those things. So that sense of genuine, hey guys, and by guys I mean in a diversity sense, hey people, what are we here to do today? How are we going to do it? And how are we all going to get the lives that we really want and be the best people that we can be? And that comes down to good communication, two-way communication, dialogue, all of that stuff. So, be a good human being, create an environment in which people develop and grow. As leaders and as human beings around something that makes a difference, and handle the bad stuff and get better every day. You've created over time you will create exceptional circumstances that will multiply your capability, your talent, and the score will take care of itself. You'll get fantastic results.
Brilliant. I could talk to you all day, but we rapidly run out of time. So I'm going to end on a really profound question for you here. And I know it's a question you ask people you work with too, but I'd like to know what your feeling is. What would you like your legacy to be?
Oh, big one. Good one. My grandmother had a motto, and she just said, be useful, which I've always taken to heart. And, I'd like my books to make a lasting difference. I'd like my books to be read without this being vanity, in 100 years' time, or, 1,000 years' time would be nice to be able to, both have an immediate impact, but have something of lasting value. And also my words in terms of talking and speaking in master classes. And, I want to change lives without sounding vain. There's a wonderful word in Africa called Ubuntu. And Ubuntu It's difficult to translate, but it kind of means, be the pebble in the pond. Be the pebble in the pond, and the ripples will go outwards. Every interaction, everything that you touch in one way or another, you try to bring something that will have a positive impact on what comes about. Whether it's doing this podcast, whether it's writing a book, whether it's doing a speech, whether it's doing a masterclass, kind of be that pebble in the pond. And so, if I could be it's a small, modest thing. It's just to be a pebble, just to be a pebble.
Well, this morning you have been a pebble for me. Thank you so much for your time. I've loved it.
Good. Thank you. I've loved it too. Thank you very much for having me. It's a real pleasure.